That's a good beer. This year, we're starting off the season of the Rochester Symphony, October 14th and 15th, with a concert we've called Beethoven and Friends. Now, Beethoven really didn't have a lot of friends. He was a pretty lonely guy, could be surly at times. He was so focused on his music, he couldn't take time to have friendly meetings or even be polite sometimes. And when he started to lose his hearing in his 30s, well, forget it. He was so depressed, he was so upset that he just wanted to stay away from people. He didn't develop many friends. But earlier on, he had pretty good friendships with two great musicians, Haydn and Mozart. And surprisingly, he met the younger of these, Mozart, first. He made his first trip, Beethoven did, from his hometown of Bonn, Germany, to Vienna, Austria, center of music at the time. And when he was 16, Mozart was in his 30s, very well established, and Beethoven played piano for him. Mozart didn't seem to like it that much, and he was kind of received coldly, but then Beethoven improvised on a Mozart theme, and Mozart went nuts. He said, "Mark this young man, the world will soon be hearing from him." So of Mozart, we're doing the Don Giovanni Overture, the great lover Don Giovanni, we know him as Don Juan, but it starts with a ghost scene, which is late in Mozart's opera, and then after the ghost scene, a somber introduction, comes the merriment of Don Giovanni himself. Beethoven followed that example in his two greatest overtures, Egmont and Leonora III, both of which start with a somber introduction and merriment when the hero appears. A few years later, Beethoven had gone back home to Bonn because his father had died and somebody had to look after the family. Traveling through on his way home from one of his famous London trips, Haydn stopped by. Beethoven introduced himself. Haydn invited him to come to Vienna and study with him, which Beethoven did a couple years later, but he said, "I never learned anything from those lessons with Haydn." Although he clearly followed Haydn's examples in writing symphonies. Haydn was the father of the symphony, and Beethoven followed the way he wrote symphonies. This time we're going to do Haydn's Miracle Symphony, number 96, the first one he wrote on one of his trips to London. It's called Miracle, by the way. The story goes that at the first performance, the big chandelier with all the candles in fell down right into the audience. But because the piece was over and the audience loved it so much, they had charged the stage, and there was nobody left in the seats, nobody was hurt, and there was a miracle. We go now to a different friend of Beethoven, Ferdinand Reiss, who had the opposite relationship. He was a student to Beethoven. He came from Beethoven's hometown of Bonn, where Beethoven actually studied with young Ferdinand's father, studied piano. Reiss moved to Vienna after Beethoven did and wanted to study with the great man. Beethoven was generous with giving lessons to him, and in return, young Ferdinand took care of Beethoven. He ran errands for him. He copied out his music. He made sure there was food in the house, that sort of thing. And after a couple of years of that, he started to circulate around the world, going to the major capitals of Europe to create music. And when he was in London, he created one of his most famous pieces. It's called Grand Variations on Rule Britannia. That very British tune was fairly new. The Brits loved it, and he put his ear to the ground, did Ferdinand Reiss, and he wrote Grand Variations on it for piano and orchestra. He was a marvelous pianist. He had studied with Beethoven. And we have a guy with just as prodigious fingers as Ferdinand Reiss, Horacio Nudid, our southern Minnesota really great concert pianist. Horacio hasn't been with us for a few years, but he's going to really shine in this piece that the student of Beethoven wrote for us, Ferdinand Reiss. Then the second half of the program is entirely dedicated to Beethoven, his 7th symphony, what Wagner called the apotheosis of the dance, the movement of the body in perfect form. The idea is simply that there's so much movement in the piece that it moves along faster than any other symphony by anybody, even by Beethoven, and the electricity in it is unmistakable. It's the first symphony I fell in love with of Beethoven when I was a teenager. It's really a symphony for people who are either young and full of energy or old and haven't forgotten what energy is all about. So that's Beethoven and Friends. It comes up on Saturday, October 14th at 7:30, Sunday, October 15th at 2, both at Lourdes High School, a great place to hear a concert. You can get tickets by just coming that day or checking out rochestersymphony.org. We'd be happy to help you out. See you with Beethoven and his friends. Cheers.